Hi there, my name is Steve Oswald and I'm the Art Director in ASI's Marketing Department. I want to welcome you to this course on converting raster images to vector art using Adobe Illustrator's Image Trace tool. We're going to start off with some core tracing concepts where I help you set your expectations for what Illustrator is actually capable of, and I'll walk you through a few of the most common tracing scenarios that you might encounter in the real world as well. From there, I'll walk you through my personal workflows when it comes to cleaning up raster graphics for better tracing results. The first thing we're going to need to do with any image we're using is to develop a tracing plan. In other words, let's take a look at the image and decide what we can get out of it, what we can actually use, and what we might have to recreate. Let's leave Illustrator and jump over to Photoshop and open our first image. I'm going to go to the File menu and say Open. Navigate to my image trace presentation, and I'm going to open the file called THL-PNG. Let's go ahead and up to the image menu and take a look at the image size. We're currently working at about 2 inches by 2 3/8 at a resolution of 95. Let's go ahead and resample this image. Let's take the resolution to 300 and the physical size of the image up to, let's say, about 6 inches. And we'll go ahead and click OK. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see it. This is your typical type of image that a customer might send you, or something that you might pull from the internet. A low resolution image which is small. As I take a look at this image, it needs to print in 3 color, gold, green, and black, on a white mug. Typically, whenever there's text in a logo, I'll try to recreate it in Illustrator. So the plan here would be to convert all these sections to black and white line work and then recolor it when we take it into Illustrator. First thing I want to do is go up to my image menu, down to Adjustments and Curves. I'm going to double click on the black eyedropper tool and set the CMYK values to 100. 100, tab, 100, tab, 100, tab, 100, CMYK at 100, and say OK. I'm going to double click on my white eyedropper tool and make sure all those values are set at 0 and say OK. I'm going to select my black eyedropper tool, come out onto the image and click in the lightest area, the yellow. As you can see, that assigned black to the lightest color and all the color. We're still left with some residue around, but we'll clean that up later. I'm going to click on my white eyedropper tool and find a little area of color and click on that. That's going to convert all that leftover color to white. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And I'm just going to say yes to that. That's me changing my colors in my curve palette. The goal here is to blur the edges of all the black and white line work to soften it so we don't have so many anchor points when we go to image trace it. I'm going to go here and say OK. I'm going to head up to my image menu, down to Adjustments, and to Threshold. Just by letting it set to the default of 128, you can see how smooth that became. Now we can adjust this slider and either gain, gets a little fat, or try to match up what we had, which I think was somewhere about there. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So now we have a pretty decent looking black and white piece of raster artwork. Let's head up to our image menu and go to Mode, and we're working in RGB. Let's change that to grayscale. We can't go directly to bitmap. We have to go to grayscale before we go to bitmap. That's why that's grayed out. So let's go to grayscale. We won't see a change here. I'll just say discard. Let Photoshop do its thing. Now we'll go to Image, Mode, Bitmap, and we can say OK there too. 300 DPI is what we have. 50% threshold is black and white. 50% is black, the other 50% is white. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. I'm going to go up to my File menu and say Save As. so I can retain my original piece of artwork here. And I'm going to save this file as a Photoshop file. Back in my folder for my presentation and save. Let's leave this open and jump over to Illustrator. Let's go up to the File menu and say New. And let's work with a US letter, 8.5 by 11, say OK. So in order to image trace, we need to place the bitmap image in Illustrator. So let's head up to the File menu and down to Place. Navigate to where your artwork is. In my case, it's in my image trace presentation folder, and say Place. The simplest way in Illustrator to trace an image is to go up to our control panel and say Image Trace. By default, it's set to black and white. Click the Image Trace button, let Illustrator do its thing, and then click the Expand button. We now have vector artwork that's editable. If we go ahead and zoom in, we can see that Illustrator gave me a lot of anchor points. Let's head up to the Object menu and down to Path and Simplify. Click our Preview button, and we can adjust these sliders to remove some of those anchor points and simplify our graphic a little bit. So this is a judgment call. You just have to see what you want to get rid of. I'm going to go something like that. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and take a look at it. Not too bad. Remember, we're working at a much larger size. The actual size of this artwork will be used at about 2.5 inches high, so a lot of these imperfections you won't see. Let's go ahead and place our original file, which is the PNG, for reference, and we'll just slide that over here. So with our direct selection tool, let's click on the artwork elements that need to be colored yellow and color those yellow, and click on the artwork elements that need to be colored green and we'll color those green. The rest is black. We'll leave that as is. And remember, our tracing plan was not to include the text. We dropped that right away, so we can go ahead and reset that. So let's go ahead and get our text tool. I'll just come out here and click anywhere on the page, and I'm going to type THL. I'm going to go ahead and scale that up. I'm going to choose what I think that is, Helvetica compressed. Helvetica extra compressed we're going to go with. I'm going to create outlines and ungroup them and move this text up into place and scale it to fit. Get my scale tool, I'll click here. Align that T where I think it belongs. I'm going to put the H where it belongs. And then I'm going to, and then I'm going to put the L where it belongs. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to show my rulers. And I'm going to pull a guide out at 2.5 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and scale this artwork down to 2.5 inches to fit my imprint size of my white mug. The next thing I'm going to do is delete this outer bounding box that Illustrator left behind when we did our live trace. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and just simply hit delete. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. Let's head over to Photoshop. We'll go ahead and close this document. Let's head up to our File menu and down to Open. I'm going to open the file called Patch. Double click that, open that. Here we have a 3-color, or depending on how you want to look at it, 4-color design: white, red, black, and yellow. This artwork looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and look at it closely. Let's head up to our image menu and down to image size. We have a 4 3/8 approximate image at 300 dpi. That's pretty good. Let's zoom in and take a closer look. Well, that looks pretty good. I think we're in good shape here. The text looks a little ratty, so I think our image tracing plan here would be to try to salvage the red, the gold, and the black and set a white, but we'll reset the text in the end. So let's go ahead and switch over to Illustrator. Let's go up to the File menu and make a new document, 8.5 by 11. OK. Let's go up to the File menu again and say Place, and we'll place our patch JPEG file that we just looked at. And there it is. As you can see, again, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. As you can see, our control panel changes automatically at the top when we go ahead and place our raster image. The control panel at the top is a contextual object, meaning it changes based on what's selected out on the artboard. So as I bring in this artwork, keep your eye on the control panel and watch it change and give us the options for image trace. There we go. So I could simply come up here to the image trace tab, choose one of our defaults, 3 color, 6 color, 16, and so on, but none of these fit my needs. I'm looking at a 4 color trace. So let's head up to the window menu and down to image trace, and that's going to throw this palette out on our interface. Let's make sure our artwork is selected. Let's head up to our preset and assign 3 colors as a jumping off point. Let's let Illustrator do its thing. When that's completed, we can adjust our colors to exactly the amount we need. So let's change this to 4 on our slider and let Illustrator do its work here. So we have red, yellow, black, and white, 4 colors, using a custom preset in our color mode. And there we go. Let's head up to, let's select it. We'll head up and expand it. Now you can see that it converted that raster image into vector artwork. I'm going to go ahead and ungroup it. I'm going to deselect. I'm going to click on this outer bounding box that the image trace gave us and hit delete. I'm going to go ahead and use my white selection tool, click in the yellow. My yellow swatch appears in my toolbar. I'm going to click and drag it into my swatches palette, double click it, and make it a spot color. So that when we go to output this, we'll have black, red, and yellow spot colors. I'm going to go ahead with my white arrow tool and do the same thing with the red. Select the red area, click on my swatch, drag it into my swatches palette, double click it, convert it to a spot color, and say OK. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit so we get a better look at this. There we go. Let's go ahead up to our window and show separations preview. I'm going to click preview, overprint preview. As you can see, our 2 spot colors that we made showed up. So if I go ahead and turn the eyedropper tool off, we can test it by the yellow disappearing when I turn the eyeball off. Let's check the red also. Oh, I can see that we left a little behind. Let's go ahead and get our magic wand tool. Make sure that our fill color is selected. Click in a red area, change it to our new spot color, and it disappeared because I have the eyedropper turned off. So now we know that that color will separate properly. Let's check the black. I'll go ahead and turn the black eyedropper tool off, and we can see there's definitely still some color left behind. So that black was made up of more than just black. There could be some cyan in there or some yellow or magenta. So with our magic wand tool, let's select an area of black with our fill checked and go ahead and just fill that black. Now that disappeared because we have our black eyedropper tool turned off. So if I go ahead and turn those eyeballs back on, our color appears. I turn the yellow plate off, disappears, the red plate, and the black plate. That shows me that when we go to output this, that we'll have 3 distinct printing plates. Now our tracing plan was to reset all this text, which I still agree with, because if we take a closer look, we could see that some of this text is a little rounded off and not very crisp. So what we would do here is just simply with our black arrow tool, delete the text and reset it and place it back in. Let's go ahead and look at our third scenario. Let's click back over to Photoshop. We'll go ahead and close this. We'll head up to the File menu, down to Open. Let's open up the file called Detective PSD. Here we have some line work that looks pretty good. Let's inspect the image itself. Go up to the Image menu and down to Image Size. We have another 300 dpi image at a pretty good size, 4 3/4 by 5 1/4 high. And we'll just say OK. So that's workable. So our tracing plan here, I think, is to retain all the black line work and fill the color back in when we get it into Illustrator. If we take a closer look at some of this line work, we can see that it's a little ratty with color. So when we go to trace this in Illustrator, it's going to pick up all that as another color and give us a little ratty edge there. So let's zoom back out. I'm going to go up to my Image menu, down to Adjustments, and out to Curves. As we did before, we already set our values. The values should stay the same. Black at 100, white at 0s, and let's assign those colors. So I'm going to select my white eyedropper tool and I'm going to go out on my document and click in a green area. And that's going to assign the green color white. As you can see, we're still left with some color, but that'll be just fine. I'm going to choose my black eyedropper tool and click on a black area and darken that up a little bit for us. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this so we get a little bit of a closer look at what's about to happen. Let's go ahead up to our filter menu, and once again down to blur, Gaussian blur, and let's put a little blur on this so that it softens the line work, maybe something like that. Now this is just a judgment call. You don't want to go too large like that where you can't see anything, and you don't want a low number where you're not making much of a difference. So it should look something like, let's say, this, and we'll say OK. Let's now go up to our image, down to Adjustments and Threshold, and we can use this slider just to tweak it a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out, take a look at it. You can see as we slide this to the right, the line work becomes thicker, and as we bring it back to the left, it thins it out. Another judgment call on your part, and I think something like this looks good. Let's go for it. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. We're going to head up to our image mode. Remember, we have to go to grayscale before we actually get to bitmap. Our goal is bitmap, black and white. Let's go to grayscale. We won't see a change here. I'm going to say don't show again. And once again, we can change the mode to bitmap. And here we won't see a change. We're going to say flatten those layers. 300 dpi, 50% threshold means 50% white. The other 50% of the image is black. And say OK. Let's now head up to our file menu and say save as. And I'll just put a B on the end. Or how about V for vector. And we'll save it in my image trace presentation folder and say OK. Let's now click back over to Illustrator and let's make a new document, 8.5 by 11 again, and say OK. Let's head up to our file menu, place, navigate to that Detective V image I just made, double click it, and place it on the page. Remember, by default, the image trace is set to black and white. So here we can say image trace. We'll let Illustrator do its thing, and we'll say expand. I'm going to go ahead and say object ungroup. I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to remove that outer bounding box that Illustrator just loves to make. So now I'm going to go ahead up to the file menu and say place again, and I'm going to put my Detective PSD on the page so we can see how it needs to be colored. So let's go ahead and select the hat section that our image trace made for us, all the green sections, and we'll go up to our color palette and we'll color that green. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And we can do the same thing with the flesh tones and so on. Select all the areas that need to be a flesh tone, and we can make that flesh tone color using our sliders. There you go, close enough. We can move on and color that artwork until it's complete. The final scenario I'd like to show you is a sketch. Let's go ahead and click back to Photoshop, and I'm going to close this document. Let's go to File, Open, and let's choose Butterfly TIFF. This scenario might be a child drawing, or somebody made a drawing and it's a sketch and they want it to look as close to this as possible, but we have to print it in one color without a lot of halftones and screens. So our tracing plan here would be to try to darken the image, get it to black and white, and retain as much of the personality of the image as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do in this case is go over here to my tool palette and get my burn tool. In my control panel, I'm going to set the range to midtones, and I'm going to leave my exposure at 50%. I'm just going to start drawing on top and darkening all the midtones that I think need to be darkened in order to get this mode to black and white before we do an image trace. So I'm just going to continue to darken these using my burn tool. I think this needs to be a little darker. This over here, all this, let's do a little of this. Let's go on and head up to our image, adjustments, curves, our black eyedropper tool, and select an area that's maybe just not quite black and darken that like that and say OK. Let's go to our image mode, grayscale, and now let's do it again, image mode, bitmap, 300, 50% threshold, and say OK. I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and say File, Save As, Butterfly V for vector. We'll leave it as a TIFF in our image trace presentation folder and say Save. Say OK. Those are just some options for TIFF. Let's go ahead and click over to Illustrator. We'll go up to the File menu. Once again, New Document, 8.5 by 11, OK. File, Place, Butterfly Vector TIFF. Click on our Image Trace button. Let Illustrator do its thing here. When that's all done, we click Expand. I'm going to ungroup the objects and once again remove that outer bounding box. There's some leftover stuff around. I'm just going to marquee that and delete it. And we're done. So at the end of the day, basically what I'm trying to tell you is there is no easy button when it comes to tracing artwork. Sure, there are some tools that will get you anywhere from 50 to 70% of the way there, and the image trace panel is a very powerful tool. But in the end, you still need to know how to use the editing tools in Photoshop to make up the work that needs to be done. But in any case, analyze your artwork and do the best job you can with the tools that you're given. And then make up the rest of the way with the other tools, like the pen tool, the direct selection tool, and all the vector editing tools that are available to you inside Adobe Illustrator. Thanks.